You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I am your host, Steph. And as we always do on Mondays, or as we are going to do throughout the off season, I'm here joined with Christopher Johnson, if you guys didn't know. And we have quite some interesting topics to talk about today as far as the 49ers, the Super Bowl that just happened. But before we get to that, just wanted to talk about some of the recent news that came through 49ers land today. One of them being Marcelino McCrary-Ball, former linebacker out of Indiana. He has been with the team on their practice squad this past season after getting signed by the team in the last draft cycle, or after the draft cycle, I should say. He was an undrafted free agent the 49ers picked up. But so basically the 49ers are keeping him around. They signed him to a one-year deal today. And I like this move. It's kind of expected, right? Because if you look at how he looked in training camp and also in the preseason, like he was someone who definitely stood out. So I like this one. I think we talked about him,
Yeah, we did.
early before the season started as, one of those guys that we really liked. So this makes sense to me. And I have to wonder if McCrary-Ball could potentially take that Azeez Al-Shaair role for this team, because Al-Shaair, of course, is a free agent. D'Amico Ryans just left. That could be someone that Azeez follows to Houston. So McCrary-Ball seems like a really good fit for this team going forward. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I like, he's been in the system, learning under, of course, Azeez, Greenlaw, Warner, under the coaching of, Johnny Holland. And of course, D'Amico Ryans just left. So I'm sure he was instrumental in his development with the year that he spent on the practice squad as well. I think it is kind of a sign of probably things to come regarding, potentially Azeez moving on. He kind of made it pretty clear that he wanted to be the guy somewhere, right? And I think Fred Warner even kind of backed up some of those sentiments as well, saying that, Azeez is due. And, and not to mention the fact that, Dre Greenlaw was extended, I think, after week 2 or 3 this year. Of course, Fred Warner got his payday. So it might be kind of difficult, paying Azeez, especially considering that he wants to be kind of like have a central role. So I think what's interesting, too, going back to our preseason conversation where we were talking about some of the, undrafted free agents that could stick around or maybe, have a redshirt year or whatever. Marcelino McCrary-Ball is a converted safety. So he's also fitting that mold that the Niners have had, right, of having these former safeties like Fred Warner, like Azeez at one point in his career, even Dre Greenlaw as well, slide into that linebacker position for that versatility, that sideline to sideline action, obviously being able to cover at various levels of the field. So, it's setting up to look like he could be a solid role player, and I think that he would probably slip in and slide into that Azeez Al-Shaair role.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm excited because, like I said, I liked how he looked in preseason and how he looked in training camp. He was a bit of a ball hawk in training camp. In some of the drills that they would do. So I'm excited to see
preseason games too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm excited to see what he can do, with a larger role on this team. And it just goes to show also the importance and the value that the 49ers are getting in this, UDFAs, not just the draft class, but, the undrafted free agents that they've been able to get. They're getting contributors, which is really important for, team building, long-term team building, I should say. So I'm excited. We'll of course, I'm sure we'll hear plenty about McCrary-Ball throughout training camp and exciting things ahead for him. But, the other piece of news that we got was that Bobby Slowick is going to be following D'Amico Ryans in Houston. He is their offensive coordinator. So that now leaves a bit of a hole for the 49ers to fill. He was their offensive passing game coordinator this past season. And he's had like different roles throughout the years as well. He started off as a defensive quality control coach back in 2017 and 2018 season. And then he moved up to offensive assistant 2019 and 2020. Then in 2021, he became offensive pass game specialist. And then finally last season, this past season was passing game coordinator. So kind of interesting how that works, like coming from the defensive quality control to, then the offensive side of the ball. And that's kind of how like Kyle Shanahan seems to like it. Like he wants to have someone who has that defensive mind because he wants to know how should we attack this, right? Like how should we attack this defense? And so having those extra voices in the room, I think help him out in that and trying to game plan against specific defenses and what other defenses are doing. So that's, I think, what Bobby Slowick did for Kyle Shanahan. So definitely going to be missed. I mean, there have been other guys who have had this role in the past and have left, right? So he just becomes the latest shoe to drop. Um, is there? Do you think they promote from within once again with Bobby Slowick out the door?
I get that impression, and this is, thinking about this, I'm kind of wondering how do you reconcile, wanting to keep someone on your team with the fact that, you want to maybe promote someone from within, right? And what I mean when I say it is Brian Greasy, right? Brian Greasy was the quarterback's coach this year. It's unknown, right, how much of an influence he's had on Trey Lance's development, before his injury, how Brock Purdy played, Jimmy Garoppolo's good play this year, when he was healthy and such. It could be assumed that, Brian Greasy had a good, impact on that. But, it's interesting. I was hearing some reports or whatever that some other teams may be having interest in Brian Greasy, right? Because of notably, how the quarterback play was this year for the Niners. That being said, I'm curious as to, that was Brian Greasy's first assistant role. Shanahan may want to keep him on the roster, in which, he may, give him that passing game coordinator role or position. But I'm also curious as to if he'd be ready for it, right? So, while I'm confident that Shanahan doesn't want to lose Brian Greasy, would Brian Greasy be the person to move into that role? That being said, answering your question, I think that I think Greasy is probably one of the first candidates internally for that. I'm not familiar with, if Shanahan in the past has had his quarterbacks coach also serve in that role as being passing game coordinator. Of course, you've got some shifting that could happen, though. Greasy could go to passing game coordinator, then Clay Kubiak can go from being assistant quarterbacks coach to quarterbacks coach. So, I think, I'm confident that we'll probably keep someone in-house and promote from within for that type of position. And Shanahan just has a good track record of cultivating talent. So I have no doubt that whoever is going to be, slated to have that role in the coming weeks will be someone that's good.
Yeah, I agree. And Brian Greasy, I loved him this past season from what I can see, looking from the outside in, right? That I think he did a great job as a quarterbacks coach, working with all of the quarterbacks. And you're right, we don't really know how much he impacted Trey Lance, but of course that was very short moment of time that he was able to work with Lance before Lance suffered his injury. But based on what I saw him do with Garoppolo and Purdy, I don't know if you can move him out of that quarterback coaching spot. But you did mention Clay Kubiak, who is the assistant quarterbacks coach, and that could definitely be a candidate if the 49ers want to go, I guess, same sort of path that Bobby Slowick went through, where Slowick came from the defensive quality control background. They have some guys, not as much experience, of course. Like they have a guy named Stephen Adigok, or hopefully I'm not butchering names, but you know me, I always do that. And then Andrew Hayes Stoker, is another guy, and he has 12 years of experience as a coach. So that could potentially be good. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely be looking at these quality control coaches, because it seems like those guys often get the nod to, move up and become these coordinators in, this Kyle Shanahan coaching farm that he has going for himself. But we'll see. We'll have to wait and see. Hopefully that's the last of the moves, that happens, the shuffling that happens with these coaches. And hopefully D'Amico Ryans looks elsewhere for assistance at this point, because it's been quite a lot already. But
yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's interesting because Anthony Lynn was, I think, there was word that I think maybe the Commanders had interest, but then
yeah,
I haven't heard anything about that in a couple of weeks. I wasn't sure if that was for offensive coordinator, but I know that they've also been talking about having interest in Eric Bieniemy. So they may have kind of like been waiting to see if how that shakes out with Eric Bieniemy now that the Super Bowl's over. So that might be why you don't hear much about Anthony Lynn's candidacy for that role anymore. But I like for him to stick around.
Yeah, I even saw, I think most recently today, I saw that they were interviewing Greg Roman, or they were going.
Oh yeah, I did see that.
So yeah, maybe they had an interview with Anthony Lynn, or maybe there's just some interest, but nothing really formed. Because I agree, we heard about it a couple weeks ago, and then it's been radio silent since then. Also, there was talk that Anthony Lynn could potentially become the offensive coordinator in Houston. Of course, now we know that's not going to happen. So,
right.
But who knows? Maybe Kyle Shanahan looks to Anthony Lynn to have this passing game coordinator role, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
He was coaching running backs in addition to being the assistant head coach. And obviously Bobby Turner is back, so there's no need for two running backs coaches. So I don't know. Maybe that's one way to, keep him around, keep him happy. I'm not sure, but yeah, we'll wait to see. I mean, there's going to be more around this. I'm sure in the coming weeks we'll hear about a replacement there. So yeah.
One thing for sure is it looks like some version of the Shanahan system will be getting run on another team. So Houston's probably, that's probably obviously why D'Amico Ryans wanted to, bring Bobby Slowick with them. So that'll be interesting as that offense continues to proliferate throughout the league. More teams are seeing it from week to week.
It's becoming the norm. Like
right.
It's becoming the predominant offense that's being ran pretty quickly, I would say. Yeah. And I don't know if that's a great thing for, the offense in general, because then defenses become, they start to adapt and adjust, and they have a better understanding of how to stop that particular offense. Anytime there's any offense that's like predominantly run in the NFL, there's this period of, whoa, it's this new shiny thing.
And novelty, yeah.
No, but of course, Mike Shanahan was running, a version of it as well. So, but now it's just kind of spreading everywhere. So we'll see what comes of that. But the good thing is the 49ers have the mastermind or in today's NFL, the mastermind of the Shanahan offense. And so he kind of, he grows the offense in his head, I think, a little bit, which is something I'm not sure all of the other guys particularly do. But yeah, so I think that Shanahan still has that edge there. But
no, without a doubt, I agree.
We'll see how that impacts the NFL in these next few years. But speaking of Kyle Shanahan, speaking of, the other teams in the NFL, we just yesterday witnessed the Super Bowl, and we saw the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid get themselves yet another Super Bowl. And, I was kind of happy about it, just because, like, I didn't want the Eagles to win. Call me a sore loser. I don't care. I just didn't.
No, I don't think.
I like Jalen Hurts. I do like Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, me too.
And I do think that Robbie Gould, I don't know who asked Robbie Gould's opinion, but I don't think they should have, and I don't think Robbie Gould should have. Like, you don't play offense or defense, man. Why are you commenting? Like, I don't know. That was just a little silly. And for those of you who don't know the context, that Robbie Gould pretty much said, if you pretty much just force Jalen Hurts to play quarterback, you're gonna do pretty well on defense. Was the gist of it. And I think we saw yesterday that just is not true. Because I would say that Jalen Hurts did have to play quarterback yesterday, and he looked pretty good doing it. So
yeah, I was surprised. I was surprised by Robbie Gould's comments, to be honest. I mean, people are gonna come from him obviously because he's a kicker for one. To your point, he doesn't play offense or defense, but arguably, in my opinion, I mean, and honestly, even if Jalen Hurts had a bad game yesterday, that wouldn't have like justified Robbie Gould's comments, because I believe that arguably, the way that Jalen Hurts played this year, whether it was running the ball or passing the ball, is quarterback play that he probably hasn't seen on a consistent basis since in his time of being in San Francisco, right? So I was just very surprised by that, and it came off kind of petty. You know what I mean? And I know Brandon Ayuk and Debo had their comments and such, and I think those are different. I know we're going to talk about that, but I was just taken aback by Robbie's comments. I was like, come on, man, like, don't take the bait. You know what I mean? I feel like some of the players have been doing that over the last couple of weeks since the NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
Definitely you can get your point across, right? And, communicating like your disappointment on the way the game played out and having confidence in your scheme and in your team. I think it's more about like how you say it, you know what I mean? But yeah, coming for Jalen Hurts like that was a trip. Like, I wasn't ready for Robbie. I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah, that was just strange. But Debo and Brandon Ayuk did not mince words. They were pretty straightforward about it. And to Debo's point, he tweeted like, what do you want us to say? Like,
right.
What else do you think we would say that we thought they were going to win? Like, come on. So I get it from that standpoint. And they are asked about this.
Sure.
Every single interview. Like, Debo was on Media Row during the Super Bowl. Literally every interview was asking him the same set of questions about, how the NFC Championship went down, So he's going to have more or less the same answer. And maybe every time he gets asked the question, a little more truth comes out, just because like you're annoyed by the question at that point. So,
and I think it did. I think that is what happened.
Oh, for sure. So I don't blame them. And then Brandon Ayuk on the channel with Brad, I think was just like, this is just me talking to 49er fans, and it's a safe space to say these things. And then lo and behold, it blew up and became, huge national media headline. But I think we kind of saw they did kind of have a point. I mean, of course, we'll never know what the 49ers would have looked like with a quarterback playing against the Eagles, right? But, I think it's hard to think that they were wrong looking at how the Chiefs were able to execute against that defense and just make them, they made them look silly, especially in the red zone twice, the same play. And let's just be honest, like, yeah, the Andy Reid, the Chiefs, they're on a whole nother tier, I think, as far as, offense and execution and play calling and design. And that's kind of the bar that it's been set at. And it's pretty clear now with their second Super Bowl that this is their NFL. Like, this is the way that it's going to be. This is the new Belichick and Brady. You know what I mean? And it's going to be like this for as long as Andy Reid wants to continue coaching, right? I think that Mahomes is talented enough that probably whoever comes in after Andy Reid, he'll still be a hell of a quarterback who's going to continue competing. But, those two right now are on a tear. It's kind of hard to argue that right now. And at the same time, how do you penetrate that? Like, how do you get past them? They're so good. And even for these past few years, their defense while it has improved, it has not been like
I
this
agree.
stellar defense, right?
I
The
agree.
defense
Yep.
is beatable, but it's just that their offense is so dang good. And if you leave any time on the clock for them to finish the game, they're going to do it. So that just makes everything so difficult. So to me, I think that if you want to win a Super Bowl, you got to beat the Chiefs. And for the 49ers, like I don't know even if the 49ers beat the Eagles that they would have been able to beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. It
Right.
might have been the same scenario as 2019. Different quarterbacks, same outcome, right? But don't like to think that, but I think the Chiefs and Mahomes, they're just on a different level.
Yeah, I think that's fair though, Steph. And also I think that, Brand Ayuk and Debo Samuel's comments certainly, I think it's easy to feel confident, right? In your game plan when you have Kyle Shanahan. You just said it a while ago, right? With the Chiefs having, not just, Patrick Mahomes, but also Andy Reid. So I think when you have offensive artists, if you will, geniuses as they call
Yeah.
them, it's really easy to say, oh yeah, the Eagles defense is going to get exposed, so on and so forth. Because the reality situation is, to most of the league, those guys looked unstoppable all year, right? But then going up against that defense, seeing Andy Reid or seeing Kyle Shanahan, certainly those guys are going to know how to expose people and isolate them and exploit their weaknesses and such. I do agree with you too about I'm sorry, Debo Samuel. I think that he certainly was getting frustrated with some of those comments, and by the time he got to I am athlete, he just straight up was saying like, James Bradbury was trash. You know what I'm saying? I was like,
Yeah.
oh man,
That was
I wasn't ready for that one. And he used the holding call, which was kind of ticky tack, whatever. But he used that holding call as justification for saying he's trash. I'm not gonna front, like, he's a free agent. And if the money was right, I was thinking like, hey, maybe give Bradbury a look, right? But with Debo saying he's trash, I think that's kind of I don't think he had been trash all year personally, but yeah, I think the Chiefs are definitely the standard right now, and they have been for some time. Well, for since Mahomes' second year 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if a team is going to be constructed to say take out the Chiefs, then they're setting themselves up well to beat anybody. I think that fortunately for the Niners, those boys play in the AFC. You know what I mean? And the AFC is arms race.
Yeah.
Even going into this year, when I'm thinking of just the names in no particular order, right? Mahomes, Herbert, Allen. What's my man over in Baltimore? Lamar Jackson. Depending on where he goes, whatever. And then even if, say, for instance, Russell Wilson has a bounce back year next year and plays, more like he did the last 2 or 3 games of this season, the AFC, they are stacked with quarterbacks and such. And of course, they have surrounding, Burrow. I didn't even say Burrow, and surrounding, supporting cast and such. So I definitely think that, fortunately, those guys have to all bang against each other in any given Sunday, right? And, in that regard, I think that from an NFC standpoint, I think it's going to be the usual players, going into next season and throughout next season, Niners, Cowboys, whether, they can get it done or not, Cowboys, Eagles. But I think the Eagles are going to look a little bit different next year, though. They've got a lot of free agents and big name free agents, right? So, but I definitely think, to your point, though, I think the Chiefs are definitely the standard. And what do you think are ways that teams should be getting built to or constructed to go after them?
It's hard to say. We haven't seen a lot of teams like beat them, consistently. I would have said defense, because in the 2019 season, that the way that Super Bowl went, I felt like the 49ers defense did a pretty good job of limiting Mahomes.
Yeah, for 3.5 quarters. Yeah, they were great.
Yeah,
sure.
and they were awesome. So I want to say defense, but then we also saw, the Eagles, who led the league in sacks, didn't have any against Mahomes, or did they have one? Was it 1 or 0?
I thought they had 0, and they didn't really
Yeah,
they couldn't get pressure on him either, really, even with them being hurt.
So there you go. And the Chiefs made it a point to improve their offensive line.
Yeah.
So how do you penetrate this force that is the Chiefs? It seems like there's no way you can really stop them. Again, because you also have a genius play caller in Andy Reid who is going to he does a great job, not just of like play design, but I think planning specifically to the opponent as well.
For sure.
And I think yesterday was a great example of that. And they scored points on every possession in the second half, and that tells you just how capable they were. Now, I mean, were the Eagles maybe a little overrated? I mean, I don't know. We won't know because they did have an easy path. They had the easiest schedule in the season. They had an easy schedule, you can say, in the playoffs because, they played the Giants and then the 49ers with zero quarterbacks.
Right. No, totally.
So it's kind of hard to say, like, were they just an overrated defense? That they were getting scored on more than I think one of the top defenses should, even against Mahomes. But I don't know. How do you stop them? I think the only way you stop them is by building something kind of similar, frankly. Like, you have to have a quarterback. And I think that's so obvious. Like, Andy Reid didn't win a Super Bowl, even being as big of a genius as he is. He didn't win a Super Bowl until he had Patrick Mahomes. And that's not to say that, Kyle Shanahan needs a Patrick Mahomes to win a Super Bowl, right? There's been other teams that have won with, average to slightly above average quarterbacks. But I mean, I do think that you do have to figure out your quarterback situation. Now, the other question I have is, what's more important? And I'm going to ask you what your thoughts. Do you think that having one of the best offensive lines, or sorry, not one of, maybe having the best offensive line or the best defensive line is the key, or do you need to have one of the best quarterbacks to get over that hump?
So I don't think it's a perfect science. And the reason why I say that is because of Kyle Shanahan, right? So the same way that, Andy Reid is that additional, and even Eric Bieniemy, because I heard that Eric Bieniemy is the one that actually identified that like half motion that burned the Eagles twice. I heard that was Eric Bieniemy that's kind of scouted that out. And actually Doug Peterson and the Jags ran that on the Eagles or something. I think it was Doug Peterson. Yeah, and they ran the Eagles earlier this year. So, but that being said, so answering your question, I think that with Kyle Shanahan, though, it's the same way that Reid brings, his, cachet and what he's able to accomplish as an offensive playmaker and play caller. In Shanahan's system, you don't have to necessarily be a world beater, right, to be able to have success and to, go deep in the playoffs, even potentially win the Super Bowl. I mean, we almost did in 2019, right? And arguably, I would say we would have been probably competitive if we had gotten past the Eagles in the Super Bowl, right? Now, stating the obvious that, if you have a Mahomes or someone like that, like definitely that's that extra that you need to go, that you need to really be uber competitive. But I think it starts in the trenches personally. I think so too. I think that ultimately in a Kyle Shanahan offense, in this offense, you just need, I'm not going to say competent QB play. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to make it seem as though it's that simple. But I think that, honestly, when Brock Purdy was hot, when Jimmy was hot and not turning the ball over, not to be funny, but I'm serious, when he was protecting the ball, making good decisions with the ball, getting the ball out quick, the offense clicks. You know what I mean? It's firing all cylinders. I think roster construction is what's really critical beating a team like the Chiefs, right? Which also goes hand in hand with winning in the trenches, having a good offensive line, defensive line. The depth on the defensive line is important, and we're probably going to talk about this more as like free agency comes in the draft, depending on how free agency looks and shakes out. And then offensively, I think what the framework and the formula is there. To your point, as you said, Shanahan's doing something similar, and I think has always had that Andy Reid mindset. I mean, the Chiefs have always had multiple playmakers on, in that positionless football kind of framework and that kind of setup. Shanahan's doing the same thing. And God, it was hard. It's hard seeing the success that Jerick McKinnon had this year. I mean, because I think
Yeah, I know.
ironically,
I know.
I think Shanahan probably was the first to see it, right? Because I remember when well, we all do, of course, but when McKinnon signed with the Niners as a free agent, there was a lot of kind of controversy, or I guess you could say, or noise or narratives from some beat writers and even some postures saying like, this guy doesn't even start with the Vikings. Like, why are we throwing all this money at him and so on and so forth? Well, obviously, Shanahan saw what he was capable of and thought that he can deploy him in his offense in a similar fashion that Andy Reid is. So,
Yeah.
Having that those pass catchers out of the backfield, that can move and get open in space, obviously dynamic receivers that can get yak, tight ends that can also get yak. Andy Reid's doing the same thing. So offensive, I mean, I'm sorry, not offense, just not only offense, but I think roster construction and like winning in the trenches is really the beginning to how you go after a team like the Kansas City Chiefs. And then ultimately, I think, although the players play, you really need an Andy Reid type mind. You really need, I think, a Kyle Shanahan type mind to be really able to scheme up and be able to take advantage. Because I believe teams like the Chiefs, and honestly, even going into this year, I was thinking this way about the Bills because I thought that Bills honestly, personally, didn't live up to expectations this year. But
they did not.
they're going to score. They're going to score points. You know what I mean? And I think when you're going against a squad like the Chiefs or whatever, you got to just outpace them. That's obvious. I'm stating the obvious, but I'm saying it's not going to be like a defensive slug out, drag out fight. You got to really put up points. And I think that an offensive mind like Shanahan, who's constructed his team in the way that he has the ability to do that. And there's probably only a few others in the league, really, to be honest. So,
yeah.
But, again, like I said, those guys they have a gauntlet every year coming out of the AFC. So it's not going to be easy for the foreseeable future in the AFC to come out of that conference.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think it's going to be the Chiefs. Also, it seems pretty obvious that the NFL really likes the Chiefs. They love Patrick Mahomes being the face of the NFL. They're embracing that. And so that's why I think this is going to be a dynasty. They've won two. There's going to be more for those two in the coming years. Hopefully there's one for the Niners.
Yeah, I'm gonna say one more thing about the
Yeah.
Chiefs, though, Steph, real quick. Like, I'll be interested to see, though, right? Like, because to me, like, I'll be interested to see how the Chiefs look if something were to happen to Patrick Mahomes for an extended period of time. For instance, right, like back in 2019, I think, when Drew Brees broke his hand and Teddy Bridgewater came in for 5 games, went 5-0.
Yeah.
Dak Prescott went down this year. I think Cooper Rush, that's his name, Cooper Rush, went in there and did 4-1, 5-1. We have not yet seen what the Chiefs look like. This present, day looking Chiefs looks like if they have to play a couple games without Patrick Mahomes, or if he has a few bad games or whatever the case. Because to your point earlier, like that defense is not, they're not necessarily known for their defense at all on that side of the ball. It's just really a matter of them just shooting the lights out and putting up more and than other teams do on the offensive side. So I'd be curious to know and to see, I'm not wishing anything on them, but I'd be curious to see just how well they are constructed, right? Because in comparison, the Niners were on their third quarterback in the NFC Championship game. I'm not so sure the Chiefs could be able to pull that off. So even with all their offensive weapons.
Yeah. Well, that's also been one of the differences between the Chiefs and everyone else, their health. Like they didn't have anyone on their injury report leading up to this game. Everyone was healthy.
Crazy.
Must be nice. And even Patrick Mahomes dealing with a high ankle sprain, that did not keep him out. It looked like he re-aggravated it a couple times in the last few games too, and he's still out there. So I don't know what exactly would be enough to keep him out, but I'm with you. Yeah, obviously you can say that for any team. Like any team is going to have a hard time winning football games without their starting quarterback, unless of course you have a Brock Purdy hanging in the wings. But that was just an anomaly, I think. Very unique situation. But obviously we know the 49ers have the defense, they have the playmakers, they have the play caller. I would say that the trench play, while, we know there's some things that could improve. They got some free agents that they got to rebolster both offensive line and defensive line. If a couple right tackle, center, and then interior defensive line, I'd say, and maybe even edge. But still, even despite that, there's still the question mark at quarterback. And I think that's always going to be the 49ers' Achilles heel. They need to figure out who the hell their quarterback is. Is he a franchise guy? Because even when they went to the Super Bowl, Jimmy Garoppolo, even then I feel like there were questions around Garoppolo. Can he really do this? And the answer was, no, ultimately. And I don't know. I don't know if Brock Purdy or Trey Lance is going to end up being that guy for Kyle Shanahan or this team. I hope one of those guys can be. I mean, they're both talented, clearly, but both coming off some injuries, and we'll just have to wait and see. Yeah, the injuries, I think, is just like the backbreaker for the 49ers too.
Always,
they need someone who can stay healthy. That is for sure. But also, I'm excited for this offseason because I think there are some good names out there to, add potentially to the offensive line or defensive line for this team. I would love the 49ers to, on both sides of the ball, their trench play to be top 5 in the league. I think that's going to go a long way for them. And I don't know. Do you think the 49ers need to make a splash signing in the offseason to make moves or get further into the playoffs? Like, is that something that's missing or not necessarily?
It's funny. It's hard to say, right? Because the Niners have shown me that in the last couple of years, some of the answers have been on the squad already, right? So, like, I'm curious to see, if Drake Jackson takes a step. I'm curious to see, what Jason Poe brings to the table, right? I know that was one of the guys that we were talking about in our preseason pod. Do they need to? I have I'll answer that by saying this. Probably. I think so, because I think the formula is out there, right? We've seen, what it's taken the last few years for teams to win Super Bowls, right? The Rams were always, loading up, going after free agents, trading away first round draft picks. I won't necessarily say that should be the model, but they were doing what they felt they needed to do to get a Super Bowl, right? When Brady went to the Bucs, bringing some other players with him and such. The Eagles loaded up this year, right? The Eagles went after it in free agency, and arguably there were, maybe a couple turnovers from actually winning the game last night, right? So I think the Niners are going to have to do something. And I was actually very pleased to see them go after Charvarius Ward in the offseason, because, I think that, there are times in which we get kind of frustrated that, the free agency comes and goes and it's kind of quiet, or we don't get those names. I am confident in their ability to maybe, make treasure out of someone else's, throwaways, because they tend to do that every year on the defensive line, right? But I think we do definitely need to get back after hunting quarterbacks. I think the squad, aside from Nick Bosa, I think the second most sacks that someone had was 5, I think. So, we definitely need to get back to doing that. I feel like they're probably going to stay pat in the secondary unless someone, falls in their lap. I'll be interested to see what our new DC, who he's able to attract because of his reputation, Steve Wilkes, because of his reputation and his relationships with other players and such. But I do think that we're going to have to, on one side or the other, offensive line or on the defensive line, I would argue to say defensive line probably make some moves. And it may not even come in free agency. Maybe there's some trade that's going to happen that's unforeseen that we don't know about, right? Or a move up in the draft. But, sometimes when I feel when you're going to the draft for the answer, that kind of concerns me sometimes, because I feel, aside from a Nick Bosa, right, who's a day one major contributor, defensive player, rookie defensive player of the year, those guys got to develop a little bit. So there's gonna be some names out there, and I agree with you. I'm excited too, because I'm ready to dig in and see, see all the chatter and hear all the rumors and see the players recruiting other players and tagging them in tweets and all this other stuff. So,
yeah, I mean,
fast and furious.
free agency is about a month away, and so
Yeah.
in these coming weeks, we're going to continue talking about some guys that we like. We'd like the 49ers to get. I've already started on my Twitter. Definitely already looking at some guys in the draft, but I'm with you that, often, especially if you don't have a first round pick, right? It's going to be hard to find a sure thing with your first pick, which for the 49ers case is in the third round. They don't have a second round, do they? So, yeah,
I think there's 3 consecutive picks in the third round, some comp picks, I think if I'm not mistaken.
3 projected 3 consecutive picks, if I'm not mistaken, back to back to back. They probably trade 1 or 2 of those, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's definitely interesting. I think the 49ers have been great at roster construction and just almost like flipping guys. Like they're able to replace some other guys with guys who are just as productive, or in some cases more productive. I would like that to be the case for defensive tackle this season.
Sure.
I'd like the 49ers to bring McGlinchey back. We talked about it last episode. I think that's they would regret not bringing him back, I think. So hopefully they can agree on a price, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think he's going to command a lot of bread out there in the open market. You know what I mean? And honestly, just because it's going to be challenging to find an upgrade there. But I mean, you hear reports about Colton McKivitz, and I'm not sure where Jalen Moore is in his development either. And the other reality is that we haven't touched on too is, every year, without fail, there's like several teams are in cap hell. You know what I mean? So there's going to be some surprise cuts out there.
Yeah, you're right.
Some surprise cuts. And one thing that the Niners have going for them that at this point in time in the Shanahan and Lynch regime that they didn't have back in like 2017, right, is they have a reputation. I mean, these guys have been in 3 NFC championships last 4 years, 1 Super Bowl. So, they're known to be a good team. They're known to have have a good culture. They're known to have a good roster, front office. They win. And I think that's gonna bode well with attracting talent as well.
I think so too. I don't think they'll have any problem, especially on defense. It seems to be like the one area where they can just find anyone to contribute. So I'm excited. It's a new day. It's officially a new season in my book. Let's just look forward to the new season and what's to come for the 49ers. Never a shortage of content for this team. So, every Monday, me and Chris,
for better or worse.
For better or for worse. Usually for worse, but hey, we'll take it however we can. But yeah, we'll be back next Monday to talk about this team. I'll probably have another live sometime later this week. Listen, I'm kind of doing my off-season lives like just on the whim. So if you guys want to know when I'm going to go live, make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure that you have notifications on. Michael Medina in the 11th hour asks, how deep is the FA pool and the draft pool on the interior OL and DL? I looked at the list of like free agent interior defensive linemen. I'd say it's pretty good, but it's top heavy, right? Like there's a lot of guys that I think are going to demand some good money. Yes. Darren Payne, obviously from the Commanders, I think he's going to be the best option. I don't think the 49ers have the capital it's going to take to bring him in. So there are other options, though. There's, I think it's Matt Ioannidis from he was on Carolina last season. And so that's where the Steve Wilks connection can come in handy potentially because he has worked with Wilks this past season. And yeah, there's a couple names. I also tweeted about Poona Ford earlier. I was like, Poona Ford, potentially one of those guys who he a bit of him reminds me of DJ Jones. Any like really good defensive tackle reminds me of DJ Jones, because I think I'm just
I
obsessed
love
with
DJ
DJ Jones
Jones,
and I miss him
man.
so much
Me
for
too.
this team. But they miss a guy like that, a disruptor up the middle who is both good in run defense and in pass rush as well. And I don't know. I see some flashes of that in Poona Ford. I think he'd be good with 49ers. Also, former Seahawk. Just bring him on over here, see what can be done. So that's a name I like that I think is on the lower or middle tier of free agents for interior. So I kind of like some of the names there, the options for the 49ers. And as far as offensive linemen is so tough because
Yeah.
teams are not giving offensive linemen away. Like
Right.
when they know they have a good one, they do not let them go if they have the money to keep them, right? And so
And if they do
I think
acquire
it's
him, they
tough.
typically overpay, so it's hard to get in a bidding war.
Exactly. So I think the 49ers would be in a tough spot trying to compete, for interior offensive linemen, for a center, right tackle. Even McGlinchey is probably going to get more money than, we might be surprised to say, but that's just how it is every season for offensive linemen. They don't grow on trees. And that's one area I think that it is kind of tough to develop and become a starter, right? So you do want someone with experience, and so that's why the free agent market is kind of difficult. But
And I'll be curious to see how, what Kalia Davis looks like. I know that
yeah,
I feel like they may have drafted him with that DJ Jones mold or in mind. I know he was out for all but I think 2 weeks of the year because of his ACL rehab and recovery and such. Um, that's someone I'm going to be really looking forward to hearing a lot about how they're looking in camp and
right.
OTAs and such.
You're right. The 49ers, like, they have somewhat the luxury of their draft picks. They can develop them. They don't need them to start right away. They can kind of just like, having them in the background, groom them a little bit. Like we talked about Jason Poe. We talked about Nick Zakelj even
Right.
as potential starters next year for center, maybe potentially. But to that point, like we remember not Spencer Burford, Aaron Banks, like he didn't play in his first season. We're all panicking, and then he becomes a pretty good starter this past season. So it seems like the 49ers have a plan for these guys, and I don't know, maybe they know what they're doing. Maybe I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
what
we
I'm
need to
saying.
trust.
Sometimes the answer's already there on the roster.
Yeah.
I take it for granted. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna be a little more optimistic about some of these guys that clearly the 49ers seem to like. Like I didn't even like the idea of Jake Brendel like
Me either. I was worried. I
being the
was
center, right? And
mad,
he did a
mad
pretty good
scared about
job.
that.
So I
Yeah,
don't know. That some of these things seem to work out for them. So I'm gonna trust them on whatever they decide is best, I think.
I
Trust
agree.
what's it? Trust the process, trust
Yes.
Parag, trust
Mhm.
Lynch. Nathan asked any draft crush to draft. I am just getting started in the my draft coverage. I haven't. If I did give you a name, it would just be because that's one of the few players I've seen already. And so based on like Senior Bowl, like I really liked JL Skinner. He was a safety. Also, uh, there's a linebacker out of Sac State that I liked. The 49ers are always getting linebackers. So um, I forgot his name. Marty Mapu, I think, or Mapu. He was someone I liked. There was a couple of corners as well. I don't remember their names off the top of my head, but yeah, there are some names, and the draft content will be coming in the next few weeks. So now that the senior or Super Bowl's over, we can direct our attention to the draft and free agency. So more names to come, Nathan. Don't worry about it. But all right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, make sure that you're subscribed. Make sure you have those notifications on so you always know when we go live. Chris, thank you so much for coming on a
Thank
Monday.
you, my friend. I appreciate you.
Of course. And thank you guys for tuning in on a Monday afternoon. Have a good rest of your Monday, folks. Peace.